So this is Garden Week Tour 7. I missed last week. I was too busy getting married, so I didn't post. But this week I thought instead of showing you just the garden, that we would talk about some of the experiments that I ran this year, some that failed and some that worked, and kind of the steps that we'll take next year to be more successful. So one of the things that did not work was this Sam's bed. It's supposed to be self-watering, but it got knocked down just a few weeks after planting it. So when I moved it here, you can see that the bottom is starting to bubble out and it's not self-watering anymore. Also, so far, everything that I've planted here has grown really slowly. Now, I just used the cheap soil, which is probably why. So these lettuce were actually planted back in February and they're just now coming up and they're already going to seed. So this soil, this location, and this planter are not working. One of the other things that is not working, I planted a bunch of cucumber right here, but I believe the dogs ate it. So that didn't work. But the tomatoes that volunteered are still doing okay. All the peas are done. Now the cornflowers loved the TP. I'm having a lot of trouble keeping them tied up though, so I need to think of something different next year that'll maybe be a little bit more successful. The raised bed has been difficult this year. I've planted 3 or 4 times over in this area. Nothing's really coming up. The plants that I bought at the store, as soon as they were planted, pretty much died out. They're looking pretty sickly. So I think it's just not enough good soil in this location, and also the dogs keep getting into it. Over on this other part, we've got some squash, but because I don't have enough pollinators, it's not producing any actual fruit. It is producing the blossoms, but that's it. So I need to think of another solution for next year for those, maybe even just hand pollinating. All of this, as I kept saying, I wasn't sure what was a weed and what was a flower. At this point, it has been several months and no flowers have come up. So these are all weeds. My hope for next year is something completely different. So the sedum and the salvia and the wild sage are loving this location, but they're not bringing enough pollinators because there's just not enough flowers. So one of the things that we talked about doing next year is ripping up all of this and making some sort of raised bed situation where I can control the sunlight a little more, protect the plants from the dogs, and also just make sure that we have actual watering in place rather than me hand watering every day. So we've also talked about putting a fence at the end of the greenhouse here, and then at the front of the cinder block garden here. And that should help keep the dogs out next year. And hopefully by keeping the dogs out, we'll be more successful even just with that. One of the things that was very successful is this water trough garden. Now I've pulled up all the carrots and onions because they were ready. So I need to till it, amend the soil again, but I do still have green beans. And they're actually doing okay. They're not really producing a whole lot, but as you can see, I do have little green beans. They just take a while to actually be ready for harvest. The greatest success is the cinder block garden. I only used high quality soil. I've fertilized anytime that the plants are looking sickly. So it's growing really good. Now the corn, next year I need to plant it a little bit thicker so there's more rows, because we had 45-mile-an-hour winds that just kind of took them out. I ended up having to tie them up with bamboo sticks. I'm hoping that that was enough and I caught it soon enough that they'll keep growing. One thing that I learned this year about okra is it doesn't like even to be planted to start in small containers. Next year, I'm gonna just direct sow and hopefully we'll be more successful and have more come off of them. The other thing that I've really been fighting are these little, they look like weeds, but they're actually pecans that have gone to seed. So I don't know how to really combat that other than just being a little bit more vigilant about weeding now that I know what they are and what they look like. But some of these that I've even pulled up, they have the pecan seed at the base. As you can see there. So they are everywhere. It's going to be really hard with the garden this close to that pecan tree to keep these under control and keep them from actually growing trees in the middle of all my garden beds. The peppermint's looking kind of sickly. I'm actually not quite sure why, so if somebody knows, please let me know. As far as I have heard, peppermint is very hardy. It does take over, which is why I planted it in this container, and it should be looking a little bit better. Now, it has been getting extremely hot here in Oklahoma, so that might have something to do with it, but I'm just wondering if maybe I need to add some extra fertilizer to it. None of these containers worked this year. I had planted them with some chives, some onions. Now, I know the containers are too small for onions now, but also I believe that the containers that are metal are getting too hot and the wicker basket is draining too quickly. So I'm not sure if I can just maybe plant some flowers in those next year for pollinators and not actually try to grow in them. And now going into the hygge garden. So the sunflowers are loving it, and the hydrangeas are doing okay right now, but this is kind of what I'm battling. So the lowest temperature was 73 in the last 24 hours, but the hottest was 106, and right now it's 104. So we have talked about trying to get power out to the greenhouse just because I do have a lot of windows that open, but I think there needs to be more air circulation inside with a fan. Just some way to keep it a little bit cooler would be great. I am in a region though that greenhouses are really convenient in the winter and early spring because of lower temperatures, but in summer you can't really do much. So these tomatoes, they're still in their can. They're actually doing okay. I just didn't have a spot for them. I am gonna try and transplant them to the water trough garden now that it's empty. And actually this little okra guy, he's still doing okay. I might get one, maybe one okra this year. The grapes are looking good, but until I get the garden protected from the dogs, I can't transplant it because anywhere I put it, they're just going to crush it. And then also the strawberries sadly have gone. So I am gonna try those again next year. I believe it's just because they weren't getting enough moisture and it was getting way too hot. So maybe next year we can find a spot for them and just grow more of a strawberry patch that's outside and gets a little bit more wind to help keep them cooler. The catmint has already started to bloom. Aren't they cute? Tiny little flowers. I don't know what that little guy is. Until I can protect this shade garden, I have just given up. Because we've planted beans, flowers, pumpkins, everything. And it all just gets trampled down by the dogs or eaten. I mean, there's the moss. They've dug it up so many times that it's just dead at this point. The pumpkins over here keep getting laid on. So again, not the best conditions to really produce anything, just because of the animal traffic. So thanks for coming along with me on this tour. Like I said, I am an amateur gardener, so I am just taking you on kind of my lessons that I learn as I go. Hopefully some of the information's helpful to you. If there's any specific questions that you'd like me to review, or any things that you've learned that I'm failing at, I would love to have you comment below. I'm always looking for new information and new ways to be successful. So thanks again for joining. Have a good day.